Testing 1 2. Can you give us a sound check, Tim Hamill? Nah, you're not good. Wait, Jimmy, you're on 4. Tim, you're on number 3. Cade,
Can
right?
you turn
Hello.
I know why I'm quiet. Look where your volume is compared to mine.
Good feedback from Beefer.
Yeah.
Welcome to Water Polo Fit Pod. I'm your driver, Marin, Lazic. Next to me on a left-hand catch. Didn't like going left-hand catch much, Jimmy. Jimmy Falzon.
Didn't know where it was. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight our special guest is head coach Tim Hamill. Tim Hamill is the current head coach of the men's N-Swiss program, University of New South Wales Killer Whales, the Australian under-16s, and is the assistant coach of the Aussie Sharks. Tim played 49 games for the Aussie Sharks, including the Montreal World Championships, and played 265 National League games for the Balmain Tigers. Today we're talking with Tim about performance, building culture, attributes of an elite athlete, and dealing with setbacks and whatever else comes out.
My best intro ever. Sorry, Tim. Welcome to the pod.
Welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much for having me. I've listened to a few episodes and love what you guys are doing. So thanks so much for having me on board.
I'm excited, but I'm also a little bit nervous to have you on this pod today. You got to mention a few times in this pod, Tim. So, it'll be interesting to see how we go.
I have listened to a few of the mentions and we'll discuss throughout tonight.
Any initial feedback that we should take on board before we have our interview?
I think you guys have got the good balance. One of you talks a lot of sense and one of you doesn't add great value to it, but we'll figure out who that is throughout.
Which one's which. Marin, how would you describe Tim as a player? Let's start with his playing career first.
Ooh, good question. One word or
No.
just he was rootless. He used to love playing hard but playing fair.
Yep.
Didn't like losing much, Tim, but I guess no one else did. And he was a good leader. I'll say he was one of the best captains I ever had. So, it was a skip. He was a good skipper.
Do
you reckon that's a fair assessment, Tim?
Yeah, it was fair. I obviously thought a bit on the way over about some of the possible questions. I guess I had to try hard and be ruthless because I was probably lacking in a lot of areas. So that had to kind of be my go-to thing of working hard and being resilient. Hopefully being tough. I probably push the boundaries of what was fair and legal at different times. But I appreciate some of those kind words, my friend.
Talked before about, just then you mentioned about leadership. Let's get straight into it. What kind of a leader were you?
It was interesting. As a player, I was never the best player in our teams through all those years at Balmain.
We had a
guy
four-time Olympian there. So
we had that guy called Gavin Woods who always took up that spot of clearly the best player. So, I guess I tried to lead with actions, how often people speak about. I was really competitive, and I guess we tried to instill that with our group in terms of how we approach each and every game. I think pleasingly we got known as a club for having great culture and being a really tough and ruthless group, certainly not the most talented group. So I think, we achieved a fair bit as a group, on the back of our approach collectively.
And you were probably the first person to introduce us into culture and accountability. We've talked a lot about accountability and how with that group that we had, accountability was a key thing for us. We held each other accountable. We had a clear set of, now we'd call it values. Back then it was just we had a shared objective of trying to get somewhere. Looking back on it now, how much did you try and shape that culture? We took it for granted, but how much did you try and shape that while we were playing?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably now teams do it as a really deliberate focus. Yep. Sit down before the season starts, I dare say reviewing during the season and also post. I think back then it probably fell a little bit more naturally, and it was probably how we were brought up as people. Yep. With our families. Pleasingly back then, the Balmain family is a really strong one. I think in the under-18s team that we played with, of the 13 players, 11 of them had their mother or father play for the club. So I guess on the back of that, it was a really strong family unit. I know Dave Woods initially and Wayne and pleasingly my father, we did speak a lot about where we wanted to go as a group. But I guess it wasn't probably as deliberate as it is now in terms of what are our values, what are our beliefs, what do we want to do.
Yep.
It was probably more naturally how we approached our life back then.
Yep.
I think what you said, Jimmy, like I know for me personally, like I just sort of walked into the culture and we were grommets and like we took it for granted. And I think we didn't really realize what we had till we sort of came through and you left and it was a bit of a lesson as well. Like I think a lot of stuff that we did was just normal. And I just thought it was just going to be, carried on. But, when you left and I know we had to kind of step up a bit and it was tough. It wasn't easy at all. So,
no, it was difficult. And I think because we took it for granted, we didn't think about it and we just assumed that it would kind of happen. We assumed that the same accountabilities would be there and they're not. And you do have to kind of work at it. Now when you're sort of coaching, how important is goal setting and you're talking about that preparation? How important is that?
Yeah, so from a coaching point of view, it's really important. And I'll probably talk a little bit, hopefully throughout tonight, about what I think the key things are in terms of how we approach athletes and how we get the best out of them. I think goals are always really important. I think AJ and or Joel mentioned in the previous weeks how important they are, and I think Marin, you spoke about putting something up on your wall. I think it's so important that we've got something to achieve and something to work towards. Even post-career, when you get, have those goals taken away from you, you really lose focus. I know something as a new coach and as an athlete, I really struggled with, because for so long you're really clear with what your goals were, whether that's around National League, whether it's around national team, whether that's at Olympic Games. You had a really strong focus of what you wanted to get to. But when you retire, that goes quickly. So I think it's really important people know what they want to achieve each and every day.
And I think that's really important with a team. But I use those same things with my team at work. I make sure that they're clear on what their purpose is, what their goals are, both long-term and short-term, and individual goals and collective goals. I think you need to acknowledge both of those. Talking about can you tell us about your representative career, Tim?
Yeah, I didn't play a whole lot of representative junior water polo. I probably got into water polo as my main sport quite late. I guess I was like a lot of young Aussie kids back then, where I played, all sports. I played rugby league and rugby union and soccer and cricket, golf and tennis. And if I'm being truthful, I was probably more natural at all those other sports than water polo. So silly me decided to choose the sport that I was least talented at to have a crack at. So for me, it wasn't really until I got to sort of 18, 19 that water polo really became my focus. I didn't represent a whole lot throughout my junior years. I was fortunate enough to start to crack into the Australian team or squad in the early 2000s after Sydney Olympics, and was fortunate enough to be part of the national squad from essentially 2001 up to 2005. Those years were pretty full on for me. They took their toll, and a lot of people ask why didn't I try and push on after 2005, but I just felt that was enough for me. I felt like I'd got everything out of what I could. As I touched on before, I really had to work hard at my game. I didn't have any really easy attributes. I didn't have many 10 out of 10 attributes that I could always just fall back on. So it was constant hard work to me. Each and every day was about hard work. So it takes its toll when you do it for a lot of years.
And how did you balance that 18, 19 till sort of 24, 25? That's when you're studying. That's when other parts of your life become important. How did you balance it?
Yeah, I guess the first thing is I've been really blessed with amazing support. Both friends coming through the club, but also my family. My family's got a really strong water polo history. So I've always had amazing support with that. From a work point of view, I was lucky enough to start working for a company where Wayne Miranda worked. So who was our coach at the time, and he was good enough to give me really flexible working hours. But without that, it becomes impossible. Yep. And it was interesting to listen to a few of the other episodes about the guys. We really rely on support of people we know and companies we know to support. Because if you don't have that support, trying to train full-time essentially and work full-time, it takes its toll. It's hard to do.
And when you're working with young athletes now, what kind of hints and tips do you give them to try and balance that? Like, do you get them to speak to their employer and be open up front? How do you help them manage that?
Yeah, I think when you look at an institute network and Swiss, in my example, there's always been the athlete career and education, which was termed personal excellence for a while, and now athlete wellbeing and engagement.
Yep.
So there's some amazing professionals that sit within the institutes, certainly more versed than I, to provide really good support and advice and education to athletes coming through. But even now, as it was when we were involved, it is the big challenge. Guys are trying to train institute in the mornings, then go to school, do their school polo in the afternoon, then club training at night, plus their studies, plus family, plus girlfriends, plus boyfriends. It is really difficult. So, being able to be planned, also communicate with your coaches, it's so important for young athletes coming through now.
I was going to say, as since we're talking about playing career, who was who was a better roommate, Jimmy or me?
James. I hopefully you note the no hesitation in my response.
So stitch up.
I'm glad you asked a few of those questions. James and I roomed together a lot, actually. And I wasn't always an easy roommate. I was a bit over the top at different times and a bit full on with preparing for games, etc. But James got me from a young age.
Pre and post were pretty similar.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we're heading down the same path now. But Marin, you weren't a popular roommate for me, to be honest with you. You're too noisy, up too late, movies too much. So I prefer the quieter rooms.
But he did have a good kit bag.
He did have a lot of gear to borrow. Absolutely.
Since we're talking roommates, my first ever Balmain roommate was a Nick Hume. And I remember it
with
was
Ali Sutton, or?
No, that was I think we had an Adelaide road trip, and I remember I did like my movies on the road trips for sure, and it was a time I think Queen or some royalty passed away, and it was just on TV 24/7, and I didn't know Nick at the time. I was only a Grom, and I said, "Oh, Nick, mate, do you mind if you watch a movie?" And anyway, he turned around. I didn't realize he was crying. Sorry, Nick, if you're listening. But he started crying, and it just absolutely blew up at me. He was like, "This is a royalty," or whatever. And I remember leaving the room, and I think going to one of your rooms just to chill out. And I was too embarrassed to say it, and Nick blew up at me. But he was my worst roommate, Tim. Just
I think her name was Princess Diana, mate.
Was it Diane?
Yeah, I think so.
I know it was a royalty, but yeah.
Good. Back to Montreal. What was your preparation? What was your lead up to that like?
Yeah, look, I can't remember the exact tours before it, but back then we used to go on really long tours. Sometimes 6, 7, 8 weeks. You mentioned Erkin a few times on the podcast the last few weeks. I was in the national team when he was coach, and needless to say, it was hard work with him in terms of some really tough camps. I remember we spent 8 days in a place called Niš, excuse the pronunciation for the Serbian audience.
Niš,
thank you, Marin. And it was possibly like the hardest 8 days of my life. The Serbians back then, or the Yugoslavians then, they had like the full squad of 30 or 35 there. We had the 13, 14, 15, and we'd play.
Well, if someone looks up because the Serbians won world championships that year. You go through the team, and it's possibly one of the best teams that's played in the last 20 years.
It was a really amazing group. It's the Hungarian group during that time who won the triple gold medal, but the Yugoslavs, then Serbia, Montenegro, then Serbia. Just an amazing group. But that 8 days in that camp was really hard. We were playing them, in the morning for 6 quarters and doing the same at night, doing 1 or 2 weight sessions a day throughout, with not a whole lot of fuel to get through it. It was a pretty full-on week, but we got through it. We learned a lot, as we always tried to do. We spent a little bit of time in Spain in the lead up to it, and obviously amazing experience to get to the World Championships.
Who was the hardest player in the Serbian team to play against?
There was so many of them, but obviously the Vojasinovic, who's come up already a few times, Savic, Trebojevic, some of the greatest players that have played the game.
And what was hard? We're jumping all over the place, but the game's changed. But what was What was the hardest part that you found as a player playing against Euros?
Yeah, I think nowadays the physicality of the game is quite normal. Like that's, pretty standard. When you look at, international water polo and men's water polo particularly, it's, everyone talks about the physicality and the aggressiveness of it. But back then, our game in Australia wasn't like that at all. And it's probably a little bit the same now, and that's something we struggle with, the lack of aggression, the lack of physicality for our national league here, and then trying to play international. And it was probably even worse back then. So just their physical strength and their size. These guys are really, really big guys and move well, and which is something that we don't often get the balance right here. We get some big guys who don't move well, or the other way around. So, so probably to answer, just the physicality and the strength of them, but also the tactical nous and the game sense. I remember one situation in Rome whereby a guy called Thomas Kashash, which I'm sure a lot of listeners will know, I've never felt so stupid in the game of water polo. They were on like a counter-attack, and I tried to be smart and jump in between. And he and a guy called Peter Birosh just made me look absolutely silly. And it's like, I'm in the wrong place here. But yeah, amazing players.
Sorry, Jimmy. That would have probably influenced a lot of your coaching, just experiencing, I guess, the physicality and just like feeling it. And then I guess a few years on, you started coaching. I know you coached us pretty young. And now that we're talking about it, it never really clicked on me, but like your conditioning training was very like training us to be conditioned for the physical part of the game. So
yeah, I think a lot of your coaching philosophy comes from your experiences, both as a player and then even throughout your coaching. Your philosophy changes as a coach as you go throughout. So even in the last 1 or 2 years, I've probably shifted my mindset in terms of how I think we should prepare athletes and how I think we should train and some other approaches. So, yeah, it's ever evolving, how's the best way to get the most out of your players and athletes.
And we do want to get to that in just a second. But just before World Champs, how far out was it that you and Marin had a golf game?
Oh, here we go.
I'm glad you brought that up. That's the only reason I want to be here tonight to share. So
I can't edit this.
I get the leading question now, James. I must have missed it before. So, yeah, before we went on the 6-week World Championship tour, my family has a house down the south coast. So a group of guys went down there for a weekend. And me being probably a bit over the top, I decided to not drink. And the 7 other idiots down there all drank.
Mind you, this is the end of probably a 5-year cycle of preparing for this. About to go away on a 6-week tournament.
Do you want to just make it worse or what?
Just trying to give context to it, man. I'm just trying to give context.
That's true. Yeah, it was my big time. I'd had a couple of setbacks in 2004 and previously, and finally got through to play in a major tournament. And so I thought I'd do all the right things to get myself on that plane, healthy and fit and ready to go. I decided to group myself in a golf cart with the host tonight. And on the 13th hole, going across a 45-degree angle on a hill, the host decided to turn sharp right, resulting in the golf cart flipping completely on its side with my leg stuck underneath the golf cart. The other guys in the group behind had to come pull off the golf cart, thought the leg was broken. So I got onto the plane with a really like a stress fracture of my leg and spent the first week or 2 trying to build to world champs. So thank you for bringing that up, James.
Look, I knew this was going to come on. So I, first of all, I might have been the worst golf player there, but I was definitely easily the best driver on the course. And second of all, Tim, as I remember it, you got a little bit concussed as I flipped the car, and I had to make a turn, and I think you hit your head or on the way down, and actually it wasn't my driving, it was you trying to bail early.
I wish that was all true. That's what I wish was true.
Honestly, I remember driving back home to the trip, and I think Guy Newman was driving and Brownie was in a car, and I just felt the worst. I was like sick in the stomach. Like all I can think was like, if he doesn't go to World Champs, it's all my fault.
Taking that story, but on a serious note, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with? You mentioned before setbacks, but how do you deal with that? You've got to change your mindset. You can't go just, okay, this is the process that I'm going through. You've got to pivot and turn and change. And how did you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, we joke about it tonight, thankfully, a lot of years on. But when it first happened, I actually thought I'd broken it.
Yep.
And I thought that it was done. I actually thought that there's no way I'll go on this tour. And I remember sitting back at the house after the golf came, icing it and trying to do what I could to look after it, but it wasn't in a good way. But after that, I obviously saw the doctors and physios and realised it wasn't broken and some sort of stress fracture, and they said, you're good to go. I guess it's probably been something because the tour is something I've been looking forward to for such a long time, and hopefully I'd work pretty hard to get to, that I was okay with it.
Yep.
Where I've always struggled was, and a lot of guys now, is when we have a period of time out of the pool, what that's going to do to condition. Even now when we look at this corona, the guys spending 6, 8, 10 weeks potentially out of training, what it does to your mind. So there's certainly some of our focal points as we return back post-corona. But for me back then, I guess it was just being so excited to still be on the plane, which was made it far easier. But setbacks are going to come.
Yep.
And I think our ability to deal with those is huge, and it's something that I think we need to be better at teaching athletes how to do it. The whole resilience piece, which is probably a word that's overused, we need to be much better at.
I guess especially for our sport, the good athletes, they don't miss out on many teams. So they're used to success, they're used to making teams. So when they do have a setback at 18, 19, 20, it might be the first time that they haven't made a team. And that's difficult.
Yeah, and I think the system probably, unfortunately, promotes that as well.
Yep.
Like with so many different state teams, A, B, and C team,
yep.
and so many national teams of 14s, 16s, 18s, 20s. Most guys and girls now, if you're talented at your sport, you're making teams.
Yep.
Whereas at different stages over the last 15, 20 years, I guess we had to get better at dealing with setbacks because there was more of them. So I think it's our fault in many ways.
Is there any talk of bringing back true national championships for state teams? New South Wales A team, Queensland A team, and just that, have the top 13 players or 11 or whatever the number is for each state, because they were the best tournaments as a junior player. They were the tournaments you loved to play in.
So pleasingly, yes. Yeah, there's been a great deal of discussion over a number of years, but I guess more so in the last couple of months, probably 3 to 6, maybe 9 months, about national championships. I think everyone agrees that one of our big challenges here in Australia, being so isolated, is our lack of quality games. We get enough games, lack of quality games is our big issue. So that state or the national championships, state-based teams, is something they're working towards, and they're working towards that for the back end of this year. But, we'll see where we end up post-corona.
What's going to happen, though, obviously, I'm playing devil's advocate, but, you're going to have, obviously, New South Wales going to be strong, Queensland may be strong, Perth should be strong, WA should be strong, but then it really drops off. Aren't you going to have the same thing?
Yeah, I think they've been talking about different models, and I certainly, I'm probably not the best person to talk about what's the ideal model, but I think if you get a strong New South Wales team, a strong WA team, a strong Queensland team, then there's so much talent, for in New South Wales for some sort of New South Wales second team combined with an ACT, SA or Vic. That probably goes against what you were saying then, James, about pure teams. But that's probably where we're at. Having 3 states having standalone teams, and then potentially making up a fourth or fifth team of some sort of composite.
New Zealand used to come over. I came over.
Yeah, they
to a
did.
few
You used to have,
tournaments.
especially in the under 20s, you'd have the Australian schoolboys might play in it. Australian under 18s team might play in it.
Yeah, I think they're the opportunities. Look, I hope I'm not talking out of school. I think there's been discussions already this week about some New Zealand opportunities in terms of if the borders open between Australia and New Zealand. Firstly, then what can we do with New Zealand? And I guess we also need to start to think about Japan and China. I think you guys probably remember we had Singapore played in our National League.
Yep.
Canada came down into our National League a couple of times. New Zealand. So we don't always have to look to Europe. There's probably some good opportunities a little bit closer to Australia that we can add into our national championships to make them really, really strong competition, which is what we need to do.
How did you get into coaching and why?
Yeah, always a good question.
You got hair still.
Just at
He's
the
got
moment,
more than us.
Yeah. It was something that always interested me, James. I mentioned before how I was probably lacked in some real standout attributes as a player. One thing that I felt comfortable with throughout my whole career was understanding the game. So even when I was playing, I was always
make us look good with a good pass, couldn't he, Marin?
That's all I had a pass. As one of you guys
it's
pointed out.
Not a bad attribute to have, but
it's Scottie Pippen.
As you guys mentioned a few weeks ago, when you're passing mostly to Gav, it makes it kind of easy. Throw it somewhere near him and it makes it look good. But yeah, it always interested me, James. I was always interested in the tactical side of the games. It was something that I always understood, even if physically I probably may not have been there at different times. I understood the game okay. And you both know Wayne Miranda really well. He probably encouraged me to get into coaching. And I guess from my experiences as a player, I've always thought about, what's the best way to get the best out of people. That's probably led me to where I am.
I got a summer question of this. First one, Tim, you like reading books. What are some of the books that you read that was sort of like inspired you to be a good coach? Like, is any, and even the leadership? I know Wayne Bennett's book, his book you gave me when I was really young, to read, and it was one of the books I still remember. But is there any books you can sort of recommend for young coaches or even players that?
My mum will listen to this, I'm sure. So I'm gonna get a little bit of a sun plug in here. But I never used to read when I was young. I was probably like a lot of kids. I just wanted to play outside, whether it may be. About 5 or 6 years ago, I decided to start reading. And I set myself a target for the first year of reading 12 books. So one a month, which for me was a stretch as a non-reader. So I knocked that over in the first year. And then second year, with the whole goal-setting mindset, I said, I'll read 24 this year. So I went 24, then 36, but then it started getting challenging by year 4. But I really love that Wayne Bennett book. I think it's called Don't Die with Music Inside.
Yeah. That's a great book.
That's a great
really
book.
Good read.
Yeah.
Excellent read.
Yeah.
I've read a lot of coaching books. Rick Charlesworth, who's a famous hockey coach, I liked a lot of his book. I've read a lot of athletes' book. Andre Agassi's book, Open, is a fascinating read. I've recently sort of started reading about Mick Malthouse's book, which is probably pretty topical at the moment, given some of his comments, in recent weeks. But yeah, Wayne Bennett, I really like how he approaches it. I went down the NBA path and read Phil Jackson's books, and I've been interested in the Last Dance documentary over the last few weeks. But yeah, I mean, like it's probably come up a few times. It's, picking the pieces that really resonate with you, which can have an impact on your athletes, is the piece I try and take out.
And we mentioned Wayne Miranda. I think Wayne was the first coach that kind of made me look at the game differently, as in he obviously brought a lot of rugby league into it, and, looking for the overlaps, and just made me just totally change the mind. And then you sort of kind of carried on that, always made me think, and obviously you can talk for it as well, but not just following the ball. And I think AJ spoke about it as well, just looking at it like a whole picture, and not just what happens at that possession, but what happens building the pressure like they do in rugby league or whatever. One thing that really stood out for me as a coach when you coached us was a double effort. It's easy to just, make one break or even cover the break, but it's much harder to go again to the double effort. And I think what I enjoyed, and when you coached us briefly, was those little things, little 1%ers or whatever you want to call them, but it just really stuck with me.
Yeah, I think we were lucky as guys growing up. We were probably, from a Balmain point of view, Dave Woods and Wayne coached us for the most part. Both very different in their coaching. You couldn't get a more passionate man about the club and his team than Dave, and God bless him. And so we're really fortunate enough to have him. And I guess when Wayne took over from Dave, he really topped up where we're headed. And one thing with Wayne, he didn't overcomplicate it. And I think we do that with water polo. We're trying to find secrets all the time, but you don't have to. It's actually quite a simple game, but we complicate every single day. And Wayne talked to us about space and numbers. And he used a lot of his football analogies and football experiences to teach us. If you've got 3 people here and 2 people here, then what do? I can see James laughing now
I
because
know
of
exactly what he's doing.
the Ali Sutton story coming up. But that was the basis, and that's what it comes down to. And the whole double effort thing is, I still talk about that now, is that so often athletes have got one good effort in them and then they stop. But if you break down, if you look at extra man defence, you've got two movements. Your player gets the ball, you go towards them, and once they pass off, you need to move mostly back to the post. So it's double effort. And I think often we've got people who are great, one big counter defence, we steal the ball, we may grab possession somehow, but they just don't have that piece to then go again.
You see it like, people either stuff up the counter attack or they cover the counter and they go underwater. They just go, and I think you obviously always used to make a point and kind of yell at us if you just made a good cover, but don't go underwater, like go again. And I remember a few of us, it was probably just me, but used to write stuff on the wrist like a double effort or DB. I could spell the double effort actually.
But that session that we had down at the bars, it must have been 20, 25 years ago. All of us can remember every single part of it.
Oh.
And the best part was just talking about space and numbers, looking for the overlap.
You going to tell a story or?
Mate, you have to.
Nah, I'm terrible.
Tim's our guest. You can tell the story.
Yeah, we had a session and Wayne used to do a lot of work on the land with us about space. And I'll keep it short, but we had a really productive session which went about 30 minutes about space and if, where you move to draw a play towards you to create space for somebody else. And we're getting into the end of it, about to jump in the pool. And Wayne got a group of guys up for one last demonstration, which included Ali Sutton. I hope he listens. And we were upstairs at Balmain Pool, on the first floor, if you like. And as Ali was in possession of the ball, trying to make the appropriate pass, he's thrown it literally out the side of the pool, out towards Cockatoo Island, and it landed on what we call the harbour side of the pool. Needless to say, the session finished pretty quickly. Everyone laughing at Alan. We jumped in the pool, and that was it.
The ball's still floating.
There was no one there.
I think it was meant to go to your brother, actually, Nick. And I remember just watching Nick looking at the ball go from Ellie's hands right across towards Cockatoo
But Nick
Island.
had dropped inside him.
Or was Nick going
Nick
for him?
had come inside him to create the space.
I
and just passed straight out.
laughing.
We've touched on it a little bit, but if we had to put down, what are your current coaching philosophies and principles? And I know you said they evolve over time. So if we can sort of talk about what they are and how they've evolved and why.
Yeah. So probably two or three things that I always think about from a philosophy point of view is the first thing for me is purpose. It's been interesting to listen to you mention that a few times in the last few weeks, James, but the whole purpose and engagement piece for me is critical. On the back of that, for me, is about like passion and positivity, which is how I like to coach, and then planned. So they're probably the three things that really underpin. So the engagement piece, I won't talk to all those points directly, but the engagement piece for me is probably the thing that we miss the most. We have an amazing system at the moment with huge number of resources in terms of expertise, strength and conditioning and biomech and physiology and psychology and a whole range of things. But all those plans become void if you don't have engaged athletes. So the big thing for me that I always focus on is to get the athletes engaged. And that's not always an easy thing to do. But, when an athlete walks into training, if they don't know what they're there to do or work on or improve, then they're just going to train middle road. And I've just found that with groups over time, and I've been guilty as anyone, is we just train middle ground. And in some respects, I don't blame the athletes because they don't know when they're walking into training sometimes where they're going to swim 6K or where they're going to have a 30-minute shoot. And if they don't know that, then they're going to train 6 out of 10. And slowly that 6 out of 10 output of training becomes habit and becomes normal. So the big thing that I'm really focusing at the moment is that whole engagement piece. The planning piece, like I'm probably over the top with planning. Like I never do a session now without planning it. I've got basically a book for every team that I coach. So I plan each and every session. But the big thing for me with planning is you need to adapt that. Because if you've got a plan in place and you stick to it, but the group's not ready for that plan or you're not flexible in your approach, then it doesn't work. Yeah. So for me, they're probably the big pieces at the moment.
And that's also knowing your athletes, right? That's also knowing when they're having an off day because they're just not focused, or if they're having an off day because there's something else going on that you need to address.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess, when you start to peel it back in terms of engagement, you've got to care. Like, you've got to have a genuine care for your athletes, and I honestly do. Like, for me, yes, it's an outcome, whether it be National League for the UNSW girls, or to get these guys to the Olympics and win a medal at the Olympics. Like, there's always outcomes that you're trying to work towards, but you've got to get them engaged and involved and passionate about what they're doing. So it's always a big focal point for me to work on that. And
it can be hard, especially for guys who might be at the sort of the tail end of their career after a few very long cycles, to keep them engaged, and also even for National League teams to try and stay engaged towards the end of a season, or even at the very start of a season. It's difficult.
Yeah, I think sometimes as coaches we want to hear our voices too much, like to make ourselves feel justified.
And to two guys who have a podcast where all we do is listen to our voices.
But I guess what I mean by that, and I read about Cameron Smith today in an Origin game at half time when Balmain came down from the box upstairs, and by the time he got down to half time, like, Cameron Smith's already spoken to the players. They've got the key messages, and Balmain walks in. And most coaches in that point in time were like, well, I need to speak because I'm the coach. I need to show the players that I'm the coach. But he's walked in, assessed the room, spoken to Cameron Smith, and worked out the players have got the message they need. So he's comfortable enough as a coach to know, I don't need to talk now. I remember Rick Charlesworth, I was lucky enough to get to attend a course with him, and he spoke about the hockey halftime. And different to water polo having 10 or 15 minutes, but he said to the guys or the girls that he was coaching, he's like, what are you feeling? What are you seeing out there? In the meantime, he and his assistant coaches have kind of nullified, or come up with 5 things for them to work on the second half. Inevitably, the playing group will come up with 3 or 4. And so all of a sudden, they're their ideas. And he just says, I agree completely. One other thing is this, and they're away. So it's all about that ownership as a group. So I think it's so important we listen to our players. Sometimes as coaches, we're fearful of giving too much to the players, but you can use them to get your messages across. And
I know we say it a lot, but that's what Wayne did. He'd let us rabble on for, usually Nick and I talking about whatever we wanted to, for a couple of 30 seconds, 40 seconds, and he'd go, right, you've had your piece, right? Tim, what do you want to say? Great, cool. Then sometimes he might add to it, sometimes he might not.
Yeah, and I think he was really good at, relationships and people. Yep. And I think that is what a lot of coaching's about. I don't think we could have respected him anymore or wanted to play for him any more than we did. That he probably said less to us at critical times than not. A good example of that in like 1992, 93, under-18s grand final. We were playing West in the grand final. We lost them 11-1 earlier in the season. That's the train situation with Anthony Moore, who was watching the trains go past at Ashfield Pool. And
I don't think Joel Denley got that.
No, he didn't get it. I'll tell him tomorrow. But yeah, we lost 11-1 in round 1 against West, and we ended up beating them in the grand final by a couple of goals. And we come over at 3/4 time to Wayne, expecting this amazing coach speech. Everyone just all eyes look at him. He just says, "Believe in yourselves and you'll win this," and walks away. And that just sort of lifted us. We end up winning the game. So, getting that coach message right, how much emotion, talk about how much tactics, how much physical input. But yeah, he got a lot right.
And you do need to read the players, don't you? Sometimes they're just flat, and you do need to get them up. You do need to say something to actually get them on their game, and sometimes you don't.
Yeah, I think that balance of, how much you talk from an emotional standpoint versus a tactical point, and the I guess the balance between those two is critical.
I think I'm going to talk you up here, Tim. I was very lucky to go on World Uni Games with Tim as his ARS coach. And I thought I knew Tim pretty well, I played with him, he coached us in National League. And what really impressed me, Tim, was we, after every game, and even before game, but after every game, we'd be on a bus, and it was usually a 40-minute bus ride back to the village. You'll sit in front of a bus, and you were just on a laptop studying straight up. And I'm not sure if people realise, and to be honest, it kind of turned me off coaching, because I realised how much work it goes into it. Like, to And then the next day, like, you know, like I was always too scared to ask you, what did you actually watch? Because the game was just played literally 10 minutes ago. But I think what you did was, and what I really learned from you was like you just made it really simple and you gave the guys really clear feedback. Not like, as we just spoke about, like not just like overcomplicated, but it's really clear feedback and something to work on the following game. And with all due respect to the guys around the team, you know, like, you know, we did show up with, you know, not the fittest team there. And, you know, the teams that were in World Junior Games then were like unbelievable. It just came back from World Champs. Like a game against Japan was the one that I thought your game plan was so simple, but yet I felt like we were unlucky to lose that game. So,
yeah, I guess I probably pride myself the most on being prepared for games and planned. You know, like I'll lose, you know, another 1,000 games as a coach, you know, in my career, I'm sure. But one thing I try and work on is to make sure that none of those losses come about as through lack of planning or lack of effort or lack of, you know, thought about the game. You know, as I said before, I keep books and books of different seasons. I'm always writing notes, but as you said, it's not necessarily healthy. You know, that's probably one thing that I've got better at more recently in terms of trying to work out that balance, because, you know, the late nights and the constant thinking about it is not healthy. So you've got to be really careful as a coach to make sure that you can have the ability to switch off, which I'm getting better at.
You were a bit awkward actually as a roomie that trip. Didn't want to have a coffee with me. It was always cranky pants. But nah, you were good. You're actually a big deal in Taipei. You're actually quite famous. I do have a video. We'll put it on the gram. But that said, autographs all the time. Media stopping Hamill.
Really?
And I kept telling him, mate, you're a coach. You're not even an athlete. But they're just like, I think you're the most popular bloke in the Australian team. Like,
yeah, no, I should go back there. It's the only place I've been well
you know,
received.
I think one thing you did really well was just koala bears, handing out koala bears to all the locals. It was good.
That's always the easy one, the koala bears.
So any tips actually? You know, like you've been on, you traveled the world as a coach and as an athlete. You're a bit of a people's person. Like, what are some of the tips to kind of get a crowd on your side?
Koala bears.
Koala bears.
Like, I've never failed with koala bears.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough to play in a couple of World Junior Games, and I learnt then that the koala bears are always a big hit. So not real ones, just the little toy ones that you can throw the crowds.
Little clip-on
Yeah, they're the
ones?
ones.
Yeah,
They're the ones. Absolutely.
And you know, one thing I also appreciate you on that trip was, you know, we played a game trying to get hellos from everyone on a going. So we used to play this game. So from our building to the food court, the close of the streets, and all the athletes from different countries would walk up and down, and Tim and I played this game to see how many hellos we can get back. And you were pretty good. I'm not sure what you did. I was probably a bit aggressive.
He's got a friendly face.
Russians were tough though. Russians were the
I
hardest.
think you got to pick your crowd.
I remember I said, I tried to say, remember that girl, it was a girl, says, I tried to say hello in Russian, like it's just Zdravstvuyte. And she turned around, and that's it. I thought she was going to kill us. Like, I was so scared. And you were like, what did you say to us? I thought I said hello. It was good. And you're actually a good roommate, to be honest. Now,
Thank you.
To turn it around.
In one of our other podcast episodes, Marin talked a lot about trigger point, TRX, foam rolls, and how you kind of introduced him to a lot of those different, actually all three of those.
Take it easy.
How do you stay up to date with the latest, or latest probably doesn't do it justice. It's more
I'd say on trend is probably
on trend, but on trend makes you feel as though it's a fad.
Yeah,
that's gonna
true.
Go on. How do you find different things to improve your coaching and even your mobility and your personal fitness?
Yeah, I'm lucky enough that it's a real interest to me. So I'm constantly curious about, you know, what's happening throughout the world. I'm actually not big on social media. I don't have Facebook and Twitter or Instagram, which is, you know, kind of strange in this day and age, but it's something that I've deliberately chosen to do from a connection point of view with my family and wasting time, which has suited me. But reading and researching is big. I think water polo is a sport, and again, I'm as guilty as any. I think we're a little bit behind the times in how we coach, how we prepare athletes, how we train athletes. So one thing that's really excited me recently is you know, trying different approaches. So I really enjoy that. an example of that is that I think so often we get in the mindset as water polo coaches of swimming, passing, shooting, and then tactics at the end. I think AFL, I'm more a rugby league supporter, but I've really watched AFL, what they've done from a coaching point of view for a number of years, and I'm looking to spend some time in AFL club soon. But I really liked how they approached their training sessions and the short-sided games and their conditioning games and their skill under fatigue. Whereas a sport, we kind of separate our conditioning with the sport. We don't use the sport a whole lot to condition. So that's something that I've been experimenting a little bit with, 4 and 6 minute blocks, short-sided games, some 3-on-3s.
But it's what athletes also enjoy. We've talked a lot about 3-on-3 and how that's what you enjoy doing.
I go back to that engagement piece, and I don't want to keep harping on it, but that's the key, and I think Marin's been good at educating me this. Like, the body doesn't always know what it's doing. Yep. So, you don't need to swim 10 400s. You can get volume and load and reps done in so many different ways if we open our mind and be more creative in terms of how we approach it. So, I'm really enjoying a slightly different thought process and approach, but I think we've got so much more we can do as a sport.
What sports do it well?
I mentioned AFL. And that's one that I think probably led the football codes in this country. I think soccer or football are really leading the short-sided game space. I think Craig Johnson, the Australian who spent time in the Premier League with Liverpool, I think he's now doing some academy up in the Newcastle area, and the big focus is on games and skills. I think rugby league are now up to speed in terms of the games and the conditioning as well. But I guess water polo wise, we're probably a little bit caught to doing how we've always done it. So I think there's huge opportunity for us as a sport and as a coaching group and as athletes to evolve how we approach it.
One thing with football, from a very young age, they're taught to play with both feet. Why don't we encourage more so playing with both arms?
An exercise physiology asked me that question 2 years ago at NSWIS, and I didn't have an answer. Is the simple one, because my answer initially, ignorantly, was like, it can't happen. But we all know that it can happen in terms of the ability to kick with both feet and do everything on both sides. I think there's been a couple of players in the course of the last 20 years who had that ability. There was a young Queensland guy a number of years ago, Kieran Mulcahy, I think his name was, 96 born, who could play. I think there's a young Balmain boy now, I understand, who can shoot on both sides. There was a guy who played for Fremantle, Japanese, and there was, I think, a Chinese guy as well. So it can be done, but it's probably a fair question. But for the guys at the moment, probably not their main focal point.
I think if you're struggling with your dominant side, you probably shouldn't go on your non-dominant side.
I'm thinking for myself.
Oh.
What do you look for in athletes?
Yeah, I mean, that's the big one, isn't it? Yeah, I think that I really hope that I'm not coming across negative, but I think we've lost our way in that space as well. We've been overawed by data and numbers and these talent ID processes. But the first and most important thing, I believe, will always be character, and what I term uncoachable things. The passion, the resilience, the work ethic, those phrases. They're the most important thing. And without those, you'll get somewhere, but you won't get everywhere you should get to. So, when you think about it, though, if you ask a group of people, what makes a world-class athlete? If I ask you that guy the question now, like, inevitably the answers come back: hard worker,
Coachable.
They're tough, they're coachable, work ethic, resilient, perseverance.
Yep.
But I never hear the responses: big VO2, amazing agility test, amazing on the bench press. Yet our focal point is always those things. I've just been recently writing a new feedback template and injury performance work, and I was guilty of it myself. I started listing like 16 attributes, and I started with all the physical things. And then the last three were, the Marin you mentioned there, coachability, the uncoachable things, the work ethic. It's like, why do we always put them last? So to answer your question, James, for me personally, like, I really think the whole character piece is something that I look for first and foremost. It's so important. If you're talking about, more the specifics with water polo. Unfortunately, swimming's a big part of our game.
Yep.
And as AJ mentioned, our ability to move in the water, our technical legs, is so important. And I guess the final piece that I always encourage, young players to have is to really try and get a 9 or 10 out of 10 attribute. You want a big card. I was probably a good example of having a lot of 7 out of 10s. I was okay at a lot of things, but I really didn't have a really big card. So I really encourage people to work on, because often, someone's got a good shot, but they're weak on defence. So we focus everything on their defence, which makes sense. Yep. But let's really make their 8 out of 10 a 9 out of 10. Let's make their 9 out of 10 a 10 out of 10, so it's absolutely world class. Yep. Character, and then obviously some technical pieces after that.
I guess that transfers across any sport. So that's okay. Yeah, with water polo, you mentioned a big shot, but if we're talking about a tennis player, it's the same kind of thing. It's the same attributes, and it's just you want a big serve. We want a big serve and volley. It's you want good defence. It transfers across any sport.
For me, I love the quote of sometimes we focus on things we can measure versus things we can use, and I think most of those things you said is they're kind of hard to measure. Coachability is hard to measure. But yet, how much of a bench press is, it's easy to measure, right? So it's almost kind of, and I know, I've done it before as an athlete, when you're struggling, you want to get better, you fall back, in a trap of, I just got to, improve my 200 meter freestyle time and I'll be a better player, versus potentially approaching coach like yourself and watch a couple of games, or watch, just learn the game,
I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of the other areas that I mentioned before. They're the things you can measure. And because they're the things that we can measure, unfortunately, they're the things that we normally go towards. And the whole coachability and work ethic and resilience and perseverance, we can't measure them. And unfortunately, because we can't measure them, we tend to steer away from them, whereas I actually think we should be steering more towards them, regardless whether you can measure them or not.
I heard an interesting thing the other day with...
Are you going to say a Justin Lager quote again? I'm sick of you talking about Justin Lager.
I brought it up once, you bring it up every other time. I want the long-term impact of the coronavirus and the current situation on professional sport. They're already saying that support coaches won't ever be the same as they are now. They're saying that a lot of the data analysts, a lot of the support staff won't be there. So coaches are going to have to rely more on their gut. When I heard that, I thought that was fantastic, that coaches are going to be coaching again.
Well, I was just going to say on something that I learned from you, Tim, I think it was a Taipei trip, and you said to me every opportunity is opportunity to learn about your athletes. And I remember I was there more as really a strength conditioning coach, not really as an assistant coach, because I lost your whiteboard and your markers, but that's another story.
Did you make him carry the caps and balls?
100%.
But yeah, it was to me, it was a bit something that stuck with me again that I learned from you was when you send the guys down we do a gym session, a conditioning session, and just kind of watch them all, even how they're getting changed. Just little things and who's talking to who. And it's just little things that would determine. And, quite often I would come up to you, Dennis, or Tim, I'm going to take it easy. And I was, very lucky to have your trust to not, make it hard for guys and put a lot of load. But there's been times also when they're just carrying on and I can see they're in a good mood and ready to go. And it was just it was that gut and feeling, and obviously us kind of talking a bit and making a call, but it was nowhere how much did they bench night before or whatever.
Yeah, I think you both, raised some really valid points, and they sort of echo my thoughts and beliefs, is that we've gone away from coach's eye and coach's gut. And I'm not saying that the support areas aren't important. They're absolutely vital, and there's some great experts out there that have been a huge help to a number of programs. But on the back of that, we've really gone away from trusting coach's eye and coach's gut. So I think that's an important piece that we need to continually work on. I think, Marin, you mentioned about your warm-up games. I often use noise as a really good gauge as to where the group's at. the clap game example you spoke about, you can hear the laughter, the comments, the banter, the sledging, and it's a really good sign. But unfortunately, a lot of people interpret that as mucking around. They're not ready to train. I see it as the opposite. I see that you've got some engaged athletes there. They're ready to go for the session. So, there's some simple cues that we probably forget to look at.
What's your favourite quote? I haven't asked you, Jimmy, but Timmy, what's your favourite quote? Or what are some of your top quotes?
I'm gonna have to think about that one. I used to be a real quote person.
Yeah.
My father, Dennis, he was really good in that regard to me. In terms of regularly, he would leave me quotes printed out, in my room or in my school bag. But yeah, none come to the top of mind, unfortunately. But I will certainly think of some, hopefully before the night's out.
Jimmy,
We'll come back on that. What's yours?
I think I'm going to go Justin Legger for sure.
There was one like the greater the obstacle, the more glory in overcoming it.
Yep.
Was one that my dad gave me at a young age. Obviously the ones about getting knocked down and getting up, etc. The Muhammad Ali one that we had down in the pool.
Yeah, the harder you work, the luckier you get.
So,
What about Pump Up movie?
I guess I'm not like you in terms we spoke before about the roommates. I'm not a real whole pump up movie man. What's your go-to?
Mate, this is going to show probably my age. I had a few. Remember the Titans was one of my
good movie.
Good movie. Any Given Sunday, to be honest, it's a good movie, but it's really the ending. That speech.
Yeah.
Just
so that
6 inches in front of your face.
Yeah. It's a game of
and look,
inches.
things like classics like actually Coach Carter was good.
Good
as well.
movie.
I enjoyed that. Mighty Ducks, if you want something a bit lighthearted and stuff,
You've
was
lost
always
me there.
But yeah, I think those are kind of my top two, top whatever 3, 4, whatever I said.
What are your can I ask questions on this?
Yeah, mate, you can.
What are your takeouts from the Jordan documentary? Anything significant for you guys?
Mate, for me personally, I'm actually waiting for it to all be done so I can binge on it. I only watched the first couple, and I'm a bit of a Scottie Pippen fan, so I was kind of stoked to see Scotty in there. But I'm gonna wait till and do it all in one weekend.
Typical you.
Yeah, I haven't been allowed to watch it yet. Good. You're coaching a lot now with both men and women. Is there a different way that you have to prepare for games, for seasons, for training?
Yeah, look, the answer is yes. They're certainly very different. My challenge at the moment is going from an N-Swiss/Australian men's session in the morning to a UNSW women's session at the night.
But even the composite of those groups, with the N-Swiss men's group, that's quite a senior, established and older group, whereas from your UNSW team, there's a couple of more mature girls, but it's quite a young group, isn't it? So even an age difference.
It's a big shift. But I guess one thing that I try and stay true to is how I approach both groups. It doesn't change. I've got a genuine interest in players in both teams and squads. I'm as passionate about both groups, and I guess my interest is the same. So when I talk about the engagement, when I talk about the trust of the group, it's exactly the same. So I've been really fortunate enough to have some really good groups over the last couple of years, which is really stoked my passion for coaching.
What do you hate the most about being a coach?
Like the easy answer at the moment is obviously the early mornings.
Yeah.
Like I'm okay in the mornings, but with a couple of young kids, that becomes a challenge into the late nights. So that's always difficult. I must be honest though, I'm really fortunate enough to do something that I really love. So I don't sit here now and there's one part of coaching that I completely hate. I often sit back, and this last 6 or 8 weeks of this corona period's been a nice time to reflect and review of everything I'm doing. But I'm blessed to be able to work in a sport that I love. It's been a passion of mine for a long time. Friends like you two guys, and others who will probably listen to this, and obviously family involvement. So yeah, I really love what I do. I'm very lucky to be able to work in the sport that I love.
That's good. when you played water polo, just go back to water career. How did when you swam up and down? Did you keep your eyes open, or did you keep your how did you? What was your tech here like?
Why do you bring this on yourself?
It's not me, mate. It's you.
So Marin's put himself under again, but I used
a bit different version again.
Like every player throughout the world, I keep my eyes open underwater when I'm playing the game, watching everything. And I just was really terrible with chlorine. Like I just Adelaide pool was one of the worst. Always.
Second time I got mentioned.
The old Adelaide pool
hasn't got a rap in this.
We'll send this to Raph Sturck, one of the great men. But one night at Valley Pool when Peter Brown was coaching us, my eyes were completely gone. And I went to the side of the pool and grabbed a water bottle out, and I was just expecting water. And we were under the pump during this game, and I went to squeeze the water bottle into my eye. I was just full of like yellow Powerade, and just went all into my eyes, and obviously stung and brought the house down. But the point of the story was like Marin actually said to me one day, like, why do your eyes hurt so much? He goes, do you open your eyes underwater? And I'm like, well, that makes sense why you haven't seen anything for 6 years.
Mate, I've been trying to get you in a better mood. You were cranky pants the whole road trip. I was just trying to get a bit of shits and giggles.
So ever since then, when he started to open his eyes, he became a much better player.
Last week we spoke about how you introduced me to a lot of tools that I use now. One of them being a trigger point ball, and I'll never forget the time you made me sit on the ball, and it was just like the worst thing. But the reason I was hesitant was like, and it wasn't just you, it was a few of the Balmain teammates, the older crowd, used to get you to try to do the worst things. And I remember there was a gardening theory, like there was kind of always talk on a Monday morning in a session, like you used to ask me about gardening, like did you have a passion for gardening, or what was
No, I didn't. I was the problem with the trigger point ball is that you end up being in strange positions, but you made it worse for yourself as ever.
Who was the best spotter in a group?
In the gym?
In the gym, yeah.
Like spotting, like I just hated people spotting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's like one of those things where you're under the bench, you want to get up by yourself, and some bloke grabs it and pulls it up, and you just feel like you've wasted your set.
I reckon you would have been a terrible spotter, Jimmy.
No, he was good.
No, it's too nice.
You reckon?
He always trying to lift you up. No. What have we spoke about? The tennis ball game down the pool. Is it Les Hobbs?
Les Hobbs special.
Yeah, how did you enjoy those?
Yeah, I spent a couple of years training with Les in his garage at Drummoyne, as the Thousand Brothers did, and there was a couple of water skiing guys who trained with him back then, but they were brutal sessions. And, I've been an advocate of your stuff, Marin, for a number of years now, and I feel that you're, in many respects, ahead of the game. That was Les. Like, he was, some of the stuff that he was doing back then came to fruition and came trends, 5 and 10 years later. But, yeah, some of those sessions in his gym, Wrights Road, is it, James?
Yeah, Wrights Road.
Were just like torture. And it was just simple things like this tennis ball drill up and back over a line. You had this bench where you used to do these hops over this high bar, this barbell where guys were at either end of it doing some what you'd call now cleans. But yeah, some brutal sessions. But he also back then was even talking about, extension in terms of back exercises and the like, and, being mindful of squat technique. But yeah, he was an excellent coach.
Breathing exercises. He was doing breathing exercises 35 years ago.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the big trend at the moment,
And that's basically why I brought it up, was to be kind of a bit of a leading thing. Like I remember at Liam Roach's, AJ's brother's wedding, Les was there, and we were chatting, and he was telling me, stuff that he was doing, why he was doing it. I was really curious to learn, because obviously I'd done a few sessions with him, and he used to train, for listeners, he used to train a lot of elite rugby league players. And did he coach New South Wales? And
yeah, he was a trainer for a number of years. James, you probably know better. The Origin team?
Origin and Australian teams.
Was it 80s or?
Yeah, but mainly during the Balmain's key periods, the 80s and that 80s, late 80s, early 90s.
And I remember what stuck with me, and something I kind of trying to learn from him and apply to water polo, was he used the tennis balls, and it was more about movement, and he I think he obviously knew exactly what he was doing, but we did a drill down the pool when literally was run up to the tennis ball, pick them up, run it back, and it was the simplest thing, yet it was the hardest thing, and it was all movement. It was all 3D movement, and I think he probably got phased out once the data stuff started coming in, and basically the injury rates, and he was big on talking about injuries as well. So
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys covered it in your chat about S&C with water polo, so we won't go down that rabbit hole again. But, yeah, I think that's another thing with our sport is that I think we've got great opportunities in the S&C field to do what we're doing much better in terms of that. I don't like to say the functional movement, but the planes that you talk about and your model is where I think we need to get to. You know, it makes sense to me, and that'll reinforce what we're doing in the pool as opposed to working in silo. You know, we need our S&C programs and our pool programs to work together far better than they currently are.
And if it's done properly, that goes back to that engagement pact. It all goes back to if you're enjoying what you're doing, you're going to want to do it. If you enjoy your time in the gym, then you're going to want to spend time there.
Yeah, most definitely, James.
and I think not to throw Erkin under a bus, but he's not listening. Is he a listener? I hope he's not listening.
It will.
But one of the things, Erkin didn't work for me as an athlete because it was always the same stuff. As in, it was always, and I knew it was going to be hard every session. And something he lost me, you guys talk about engagement, like he lost me so early on because of that. And I just couldn't, it's not always I couldn't hack it. Like I always liked working hard, but it was just like draining. It just drained me. And that was just nationally, it wasn't even a national team. So.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you start as a coach then to think about, the need for repetition versus the need for variety. I know one thing that I've made a mistake of, quite recently is that, I was trying to really work on that engagement piece, but as a result, I was making every session different. But because of that, I wasn't really progressing them through drills, and the repetition didn't take place in the drills. So, like most things, there's a sweet spot in terms of where you need to hit some repetition, but you need to create some variety to get that engagement.
Because both Tyler and AJ, they were saying that the leg drills that they did at the start of every session enabled them to be better water polo players because they were able to move better in the water. So you do have to hit that sweet spot. Yeah,
and I probably think that's probably one thing, probably the biggest change from when we played to now is legs. I think Dalibor was one of the early ones in this country. I know Erkin started some stuff with legs and bands.
Yep.
But that now is our main piece. We'll warm up and then spend 30 minutes on legs. The creeping into blocking to gliding, as opposed to where we used to spend time in the horizontal position swimming. It's now into these technical leg drills, and there's just so many of them.
Who are the countries? And you've seen a lot of different countries prep for games, and who are the countries that are doing it well? Like, who do you think is doing it really well?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably the countries that are that we hear most about, and who are doing the best at the moment. You obviously talk about your Serbians and your Croatians, but from a junior development point of view, the Italians, they do some really amazing, let's just call them technical leg drills. The Greeks have a really good junior development program as well, with a similar focal point. And from a national team point of view, I really like how the Spanish are going about things at the moment.
Yes,
and maybe that because that's a little bit different in terms of their style of play and their approach, but you can see some obvious things that they're working on. So Italian juniors, Greek juniors, obviously the senior groups, the main players, but plus the Spanish at the moment as well.
When you're picking a team, if you got completely fresh slate, how do you go about it? Where do you start with? What's the spine that you work with? How do you build a team from scratch?
Yeah, I mean the talk at the moment is about this whole. Let's just, for argument's sake, talk about 13 players. There's discussions about 11 for future and potentially 12. But
don't confuse us. Let's go.
Sorry. You got your two goalkeepers, and then most people go down the path of two centre forwards, two centre backs, and then we talk about left side and right side. And I think that is still important, but my concern at the moment is that we're doing that at such a young age that we're hindering some development in terms of game sense. And I think if we do end up more down the 11-a-side path, you're going to want to have the ability to play multiple positions. So if you're a right driver and you can only play right driver, which is the good side of the pool as a right-hander, then you need to be absolute best at that. But as a right driver, you should also have the ability to do something else. That something else could play on the other side of the pool, play as a second centre forward, or then spend some time at centre back. So, if we do have any, young players that listen to this, I really encourage you to work on your ability to play multiple positions. Yes, you'll have your key position, but, be able to play two sides. I think AJ spoke about when he went to Serbia and he got swung to the other side of the pool.
Yep.
And AJ now can play both sides, which is a real strength of his. So, I look at players who can play multiple positions now. I think it's so important.
Well, most players, when they go into a national team or a rep team, they probably don't play in their ideal position, do they? Like they might be a goal scorer for their
Tyler
club
spoke
side.
about that. Tyler, when he went to national team, he couldn't play his preferred position.
Well, he did call himself a goal scorer. That was the
He did
position.
actually
That was
talk it
the
up.
position. I
He
don't
did
think
talk
that's a
up.
technical position.
That actually reminds me, the other guest and I used to think he was a bit of a shooter. You were a big deal in Hawaii too, when I think about it.
Do you know Tim scored 325 National League goals?
Did he really?
325.
Hog.
The only bloke that our clubs that scored more is G Woods.
Mate, he had blinkers on. Like, did you and Woods have blinkers on? It was like, how many times, Jimmy? How many times were you free? It was 3-on-2. You did all the hard swimming. He could have passed you the ball and he just went for a glory himself.
Now, I've been fortunate enough to get a couple of plugs on the pod in the last few weeks, but James was excellent on the post.
He was good.
One of the great post players, and I used to love the 6-2 pass to him. You, Marin, you're a little bit different.
My post we had good guys on a post. There was no need for me to go in there.
It was funny, the big rush to the one position. There was about 4 of us swimming there.
I was always the first one there as well.
Oh, it was a good rush between the two of you, Nick.
Matt Claridge got hit.
Claridge, yeah.
The best thing actually, Jimmy, you had a good tan as well, so you can never lose Jimmy like on a counter attack, on a counter D.
A good tan.
Yeah.
Well put.
But your right hand catch was your go-to though, yeah.
I mean, you look at some of the guys now, how well they shoot the ball.
Yeah,
like they really have great options when they shoot. I had one like stock standard shot, which is like my favourite shot.
Getting the ball off the hand quickly.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. But if there was a block up in front of me, I was in trouble. But there was plenty of pressure on to get down to the one position.
You used to pride yourself on blocking as well, actually.
If I think about like water polo, like what I really love was like making good passes and blocking. I used to really pride, and I think as a group we prided ourselves on defence. That was back to the two hands blocking days and
how good was that?
Yeah, corners versus no corners. Rule change now, but I used to love the blocking aspect of the game. Just
since we've gone about a bit of Balmain, we'll talk about Balmain and Jimmy. I know your brother's a big fan of the show, but G used to hate it when he made a little. He used to make the little block, a little tip, and he used to call tell referee. They used to give me the Nick. I know you're listening, but I know you like to be fair and all the rest of it. But geez, he used to give me the shit.
Yeah, you weren't alone.
I reckon he did it just for a break.
Yeah.
Get his numbers up.
Yeah,
blocking stats.
Yeah, assist. Yeah, assist.
Yeah. He kept stats on it too, I reckon.
He was a good sledger. Who do you think was the best sledger in our team?
He was good, Nick.
Yeah.
And with thing like with Nick, like he actually went really personal with his sledges.
Too personal.
Like wives and girlfriends and mums. Like some of it was like really cringeworthy. Like at the time, in the heat of the game, like you found it quite funny. But when you think about it, it was over the top. Dane Sanders was bad too.
Yeah, he was bad.
He was trouble.
You were good, a sledge.
I didn't have much to say.
Usually underwater. That was good.
Tim, what other sports would you want to work with? If you kind of went into a high performance role and another, or even another coaching role, I know you said you might do some work with the AFL, but what other sports and what other athletes would you love to work with?
Yeah, good question. I'm really interested. I'm not, as I said, I'm going to repeat myself from earlier, but I'm really interested in AFL's approach. I just think they've got a lot of things right for a long time. So, I really hope to spend some time in a particular club, when things go back to normal. With athletes, it's, Marin talks about, judge yourself by the worst athlete as opposed to the best, but there's so many great people to work with at the moment. We have our athletes, coming and going in terms of their engagement levels and motivation, but there's some really good people to work with at the moment. But sport-wise, like I'm interested in the soccer short-sided games piece, which I intend to explore a little bit more, which is interesting because I'm more a rugby league supporter, but AFL and soccer are two that come to mind. I haven't got into the MMA like Marin has, but it's interesting what you'd probably term as like a brutal and thuggish type sport. Their training philosophies and approach to it is really impressive as well. So I think there's some great opportunities to learn through that as well.
How would you go? Are you going to have a punt when you get on the field in AFL? Are you going to go? You're going to?
Nah, terrible.
Yeah.
No, actually, one interesting thing that just come to mind now is that I did a level 1 AFL coaching course when I did a Bachelor of Physical Education as my uni course. We had to complete an X number of level 1s to pass it. And I remember the guy there who was teaching the AFL course, and we went there on the first day, and most sports would teach it in the traditional way. And this guy said, right, we're going to play a game. So we went out there, we just started playing. And none of us knew the rules, but he would go for 2 minutes, he'd stop and say, righto, you can only run X number of paces. If you catch a mark, this is what happens. Play again. We go for another 2 or 4, and he'd stop. So he actually taught us the rules on the run. So when you talk about playing games and engagement, you got to involve straight away. Then you go to another sport to learn how to play. They'd sit you down, go through all the rules in a lecture room, and just didn't have the impact. So maybe that's probably sparked my interest in AFL.
You just reminded me actually. We spoke about communication and stuff. When I was at uni, we had to do like a unit thing on coaching athletes with disability, and I'll never forget it. We had this lady, and she was in a blind cricket team. So anyway, she spoke about blind cricket, and we had to go out and play blind cricket. So basically, they blindfold you, and the ball makes a noise, and you have a person. Be your eyes essentially, kind of tell you where to feel, but you learn pretty quickly how poor you are at communication. Like it was just kind of like, if I was with Jimmy, I'd be like, oh, Jimmy, ball's it right there. And he's blind. So he's like, well, what do you mean it's right there? It's like, well, no, just pick it up. It's just there. Like,
were you guys at the camp at Girral when Wayne took us, pre-season camp? We did a communication exercise. Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, vaguely.
He got us to try and tell somebody how to tie their tie. And it just reinforced the point of how deliberate you need to be with your communication, because it's like, put the tie around your neck and then you wrap around 6 times. Okay, undo it. And exactly what you're talking about there. That communication thing is so important.
And with the goalkeepers that we had on the pod, we speak about communication, and you see it in a game. I think goalkeepers that I like playing with the most are ones that are pretty clear where to go, and it made you look good because they just said, Marin, go there. And that was it. We're often, like I watch some games now, and it's like, there's a lot of fillers. Like there's a lot of kind of fillers, not just by players in the water, but like even coaches. Like, so it's just knowing what to say, when to say.
Yeah, I mean, I made the point before is that as coaches, sometimes we feel like we need to justify ourselves and seem like we come across to know everything, so we try and fill in time with words. But look pre-game at some water polo coaches, like they're there talking for 45 minutes before the game on pool deck. Like, for me, if you're needing to spend 45 minutes pre-game, then you've stuffed up your week.
Mm.
Your pre-game talk should be really deliberate, a reminder of what we spoke about at our last training session. And even post-game. Like there's some frameworks that I use, how I do my pre-game talks and my post-game talks, and I follow those frameworks, because if you don't, you'll lose the group. And you've wasted your week if you're spending so long pre-game.
And there's nothing worse than after a game, sitting down when you just want to decompress yourself, go through it in your own mind, and a coach talks to you for hours and hours.
It just reminds you, like, all the shit thing you did in the game. It's like, mate, I was there.
And like we've spoken about, the important thing after a game is actually recovery. Because with most National League games, you've probably got a quick turnaround, so you actually need to then be thinking about.
One simple thing I use is what I like today was this. What I want to see more of is this. As a simple framework for me, they talk about that stop, start, continue as another like leadership framework. But I like that post-game. Like I'm not a big talker post-game. Like Leah at the club, like she really likes talking post-game. So we've agreed as a team that we want to talk, but we know that it's not going to be too long, and this is the framework we operate under.
What since we talk about a bit of mental side of the game, and probably something we didn't really talk about much in a pod, but if you're an athlete and you had a really bad game, bad performance, what would you tell that athlete? Like if Jimmy had a bad game, because I never had a bad game, but if Jimmy had a bad game, what would you tell him? What would be your approach? Would you say speak to him straight away, or would you speak to him after? Or what would
Yeah, I guess in the national team, that's probably the role that I played at different times in terms of, as an assistant coach, you work out, what role the head coach is playing in terms of their approach, and you often play a different role. There's no point having the same thing happen. So I've been in a position, after some important games, to have that conversation with athletes. But the most important thing is to listen. So often as coaches, we go straight into solution mode. But the really important thing is to listen. This is the athlete's time. They're talking about what they're experiencing, what they're feeling. And, I'm really deliberate with the questions that I ask. It's not like you should do this. It's like, I wonder if you've thought about this. And, in promoting their thinking about what they do, inevitably, that's the best way to handle it. But it's done. It's done.
But that's also a role of a good mentor, isn't it? Mentors don't come in with solutions. They help you find the problems. They help you ask the right questions of yourself to be able to answer it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably my big thing at the moment is getting better at, how I approach these, what they now term, difficult conversations, which, I've had to have in the last couple of years, and what questions to ask and not, and listening, because often the athletes, they want to talk, and they want someone to listen.
When I look back, us as a Balmain playing group, one of the things that, again, I probably took it for granted, but every time I had a shocker of a game, like, you never felt like, you walk up to a change room, your head's down, and you don't want to actually walk in a change room, especially if you had a really bad one. But our group was always quite positive and encouraging, to the point it was like, didn't even talk about it. It was like, to your point, like, it's done. Like, you can't change it now. And it wasn't until next session that either Wayne or yourself or, anyone will come and say, oh, let's work on this. And it just empowered you as an athlete. And I think you still do that as a coach. I've seen you do it a lot when we were in Taipei, but I think it's a very good, your value that you as a coach is just let it be.
I mean, without stating the obvious, the athlete's the first person that knows when they've stuffed up. Like, they know before anyone that they've stuffed up. So the last thing they need is for someone else to jump on board and just reinforce the point. The moment's gone, the situation's happened, and that's the time to move on and build. And for different athletes, that's a different approach. I think that's probably the other piece, is that as a coach, if you have a blanket approach for all your athletes, it's not going to work. It just can't work. How I treat athlete A and athlete B has to be different, because what they need is very different. So, but that's constantly evolving. Working out who needs what, and I'm certainly haven't got it dialed in, but that's the working pieces for me.
But you do have a fair spectrum again. Like, you mentioned Leah before. Leah's got a young child. But then you've got these young kids, 16, 17, 18 in the same squad. You can't treat those two athletes in the same way, and you can't speak to them in the same way. It's the big one is that, I mean, you've got to have an interest in the athletes. If all your conversations with them about water polo and the outcomes, then it's just not going to work. You mentioned Leah there, like, I couldn't hold her more highly. Like, in all the times that I've played and coached, I would put her, and this is a big call, like, in the top couple of coachable athletes. Like, she's unbelievable. Like, in terms of respect and work ethic and output, like, she's unbelievable. Been in the national program for 10
a long time.
Years?
Long time. Like, so she's one that's amazing to coach. And I know that I've been really fortunate enough with the group at UNSW over the last couple of years with some really good people. It started with like Kara Mirabito, who coached the group initially, and Alicia Brightwell. And obviously Daisy Carter and Leah have taken over leadership now. But, some really good people. Good players, but amazing people as well.
I think you're being very modest there, Tim, though. Like, I mean, I can say, but like, with all due respect, like, before you coach them, it's not like they had some, very good results. So I feel like you're kind of responsible for creating that position to, be fortunate, as you say it. But, how many, you won one title and you were in the finals. You didn't miss out. Did you miss out in the finals since?
So in the first year, we missed out on the finals on countback.
Yeah.
And then year 2, we were lucky enough to win. And then year 3, we came third. And obviously fourth year, we don't know.
I think, and, I guess you're a friend. And I think one of your also strengths is you're approachable. So for any young coaches that's listening, I think it'd be worthwhile to reach out and talk to you. Probably on social media, but you're not on social media. So.
Yeah, come through, Marin. He'll get you in touch.
Yeah, we'll come to Water Polo Fit website. We got a new website, so come through. We promise we'll pass it on.
Yeah, I think the timing of my arrival at UNSW, might have been the lucky thing. They, the men's program, had enjoyed success for a long time, and as a club, they were really keen to rebuild the women's program to be successful. Look, I appreciate your kind words, but as I said, I couldn't speak more highly of the group in terms of where they wanted to go, and we were pretty blunt, when I first arrived in terms of where they wanted to go, and to do that, we had to approach it a certain way.
It's cool. You got anything else?
A couple more questions. We'll be nice and quick. Favourite players to watch, worldwide, present, past?
So in the past, probably my favourite player in the past was Thomas Kashash.
Mm-hmm.
I just think he was,
He was a good sword too.
A good-looking rooster, wasn't he?
Good
He
sword.
used to brush his hair after every training session with a little
He
comb.
would have gone all right with the Hungarian ladies for sure.
So I really liked, how he played. Perone from Spain/Brazil/Spain. The reason I like him is because of his, passing and assist ability in his game sense. And, I've been lucky enough to get some drills of him that he did up in Yug from a couple of years ago, and just watching him move in the water. So they're two that come to mind. And, we always talk about the international guys, as our favourite, but, and I won't mention any names for obvious reasons, but, there's some of these Aussie guys that, I really like coaching and I really love playing. And so often we think about overseas, our first point in call, but we really don't have to look too far to see some great players in this country as well.
Did you make any buddies on tours? Like when you went overseas, did you make any friends from other teams?
No, it was a little bit different. No, it was all, there was probably less guys, time overseas back then. So it wasn't a huge one, but I roomed with Aaron Jones on one tour. He came away and, he ended up being like best buddies with one of the Yugoslavian players, Trebojevic.
Oh, AJ loves Trebojevic.
And
he's the
Peter
bloke from Manly.
but they just swapped DVDs. So every night there'd be a knock on the door.
Showing your age here, mate.
Aaron always had the latest kit.
Solid.
He used to had like the mini discs, the DVDs, everything.
Yeah. So but no, I didn't have much contact with him then.
Yeah, right. What do we need to do to grow our beautiful game in Australia?
Well, I think initiatives like this are fantastic. Whilst it's a bit of a fun thing for us all to do, I think initiatives like this are really good. I think we need to really tidy up the pathway in terms of athletes having so many coaches and getting pulled in so many directions. We've had a few attempts at that and failed, but it's something we need to look at. If you look at someone, young Balmain player like a Joel Smith, like he would have 4 or 5 coaches. And probably 4 or 5 really good coaches, but getting pulled in different directions, and
all with their own objectives.
Yeah, all got their own interests and objectives. And as you mentioned before, we need to find a way to get high quality games, whether that's the national championships and being consistent with that. There are a couple of important things for us for sure.
Yeah, and I think even especially with girls, we've mentioned it a few times now with the increase of the AFLW, of the Women's Big Bash, of now these professional sports. We don't have the first pick of the best female athletes. And I think in the past we probably have. I think that's something that we probably need to work out a way to address.
Yeah, the challenge is as big as ever. But I keep going back to having an amazing product. Like water polo suits this country. It's a physical game. It's an aggressive game. It's done in water, summer. So the ingredients are there to do something huge with this sport. But we just need to make some better choices along the way.
Random question. Did you used to wear rubbers when you played?
I tried one pair, a blue arena pair for one game, and that was it. And then I also tried the built-in Hector for one game.
Oh, yeah.
But no, I never wore them. I was just the single pair, best pair of Delfina's sponsor or not. Is he a sponsor, Delfina, or not?
Well, we're trying to get a deal, but they've been tight. Corona, apparently.
Well, so until he's a sponsor, the best pair that I had were the black Spanx.
Oh, yeah.
They're my favourite pair. Yeah, they were my favourite.
You'd be filthy, Tyler, with this. Hey, this is so random, right? But I think first time I met you, Jimmy, you had a white pair of rubbers. They were like
His brother had the
Red,
red.
some good ones.
yeah, red Nick.
Yeah, I think he
yeah.
The Reds.
Nick used to love swimming cap as well.
Did he?
Oh, I remember a few sessions down at Dawn. He used to crank him and Chris Dyson. The only two that I know.
I don't remember that one.
Nick can
Yeah.
confirm.
Last question. Perfect pair.
I'm so glad you asked me. I've been preparing a little bit. Now I want to go a bit left field
Yeah.
because all the big names have been mentioned. Like probably my combination with Gav, more him than me,
Yep.
was probably that was my biggest like player connection throughout my career. But he's going to get drafted somewhere else, so I want to leave him alone. But I really want to put forward a nomination for an international pairing. Torsten Kraut
Oh, old school.
and a Kiwi friend of yours who was a dead set scrapper, Claridge.
Oh, Matty
Yes.
Claridge. Matt is trying.
Yeah,
is dying.
Matty or Spud?
Matt, when he was 96 kilo, not his current 82 on his vegan diet.
He's been dying to get on the pod, Matt.
However,
Claridge.
I'm not finished
Yeah.
yet. My old mate Damien Lawler.
Oh, FIFA. He's going to be
Much forgotten
stoked.
about.
Love it.
Yeah.
It was a perfect game
Yeah.
for him. Wrestling, no swimming, barbecue and beer after. So I'm going to lock in Beefer, please.
Beefer. He's going to be stoked. He's a listener, Beefer.
is.
He's
He
a big fan. Good feedback as well. The only feedback that we got so far.
And as a coach, who's your you've got the international too, but if you're as coach, who do you pick?
Of the current like Aussie and Swiss guys,
Sure.
I reckon it'd be good. He's been mentioned before, like Lockie Edwards.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
got to start in my team.
Yep.
Yeah, he would be good in front of goals.
And who's feeding him? Who's out top feeding him? Who's doing the scrappy work out back?
you're a good scrapper.
I enjoyed that.
Oh,
That's
nah, he's a pretty boy. He
Yeah.
didn't like that. You like the.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
why he's
yeah.
feeding.
Back, not in the
Not like in the middle. And the other
Yeah.
big tiger non-mentioned thus far, Ken Miranda. He was very good at pairs. So I'm going to lock in Beefer, but please,
I feel you got-
Claridge and Torsten would be notable mentions.
Going with the heavyweights. It's not a small man's game, is it? The pairs.
Not, mate, when we get opened up, when the pool's back open, we're having a world
International.
international world championships of pairs.
Do it for sure.
Very good.
Anything else you wanted to? Any final words?
No, thank you. It's been really nice to reminisce about some of the old times and talk about the coaching and water polo. As I said, love what you guys are doing, and thank you for listening and thanks for having me.
Mate,
Pleasure.
thanks for being on, and thanks everyone for listening. Hope you enjoyed this podcast episode and learned a little bit about a bit of everything.
Do you need to
Um,
promote it? Do we need to promote anything?
I've got another paragraph.
Sorry.
Email us at james@waterpolo.fit if you have show ideas, disagree with us on anything, want information on training specifics, or just want to say hi. You can find show notes at waterpolo.fit. Chat to you next time.